Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of First Impressions. Today I'm going to be looking at Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. I'm going to talk about what you do in the game, the gameplay, graphics, sound, give you my overall impressions and go through the good points and the bad. And I hope you enjoy this video.
I miss you.
So, what's the aim of the game in Resident Evil 7? Well, you play as Ethan, and at the very start of the game, you see him watch a video on his computer of his wife, Mia, looking happy as she gives him a message about how she's doing, presumably while working. Immediately after this message, the mood darkens considerably as another movie is played, showing Mia to be bound in a chair, scared, filthy looking, and she tells Ethan she shouldn't have lied and to stay away. This mysterious second message was sent out of the blue, and it's been 3 years since the first message and Mia's been missing all this time. Ethan sets out to find her, but the events become more shocking and brutal as you end up in the clutches of the Baker family and their house of horrors.
What the hell?
Rise and shine, sleepyhead. It's time for supper.
Who are all you people?
The biggest change in Resident Evil 7 compared to the previous games in the series is a shift from a third-person perspective to a first-person view. Prior to Resident Evil 7's launch, the announcement in their change of perspective from the third to the first-person view caused some initial mixed reactions and reservations from long-term fans of the series. I think the main reason for this, in my opinion, is the sense of disappointment from the last games that were released in the series. These saw the games move away from the traditional survival horror roots to become more action orientated and featured a lot of movie style set pieces you typically find in a Michael Bay film. Personally, I quite enjoyed Resident Evil 5, although to me it did seem like you were fighting in a constant war zone. It almost felt like Capcom wanted to take the later events of Resident Evil 4 when you were fighting the sort of army type Ganados and tried to make that as a whole game in itself. And Operation Raccoon City, although that was done by a different developer, I did enjoy that because it was set during the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3 and you got to play as the bad guys. However, when you got to Resident Evil 6, the game for me was pretty crap really. Apart from Leon's campaign, the rest of it felt like a massive chore to play and it just felt really underwhelming and disappointing. I remember playing all the campaigns as each primary character just because I felt I had to justify to myself that I'd paid full price for a game. I wanted to get my money's worth out of it. I traded it in a week later, and I think I got about a third of what I actually paid for it, and it really was a crap game that didn't give you any desire to replay it. So I think this experience has made a lot of fans wary just because they didn't know what direction Capcom were going to go. Were we going to make the series much worse, or were we going to try and get back to the original roots? Thankfully, it seems like Capcom have learnt from the mistakes of the last games and listened to what fans have wanted. The change in perspective is quite a bold move, but so was the introduction of the over-the-shoulder camera when Resident Evil 4 was released, and what made that game stand out even more was the zombies were replaced with the last Plagas, and that game did phenomenally well and has had many re-releases and revisions over the years. The gameplay is quality, and just like the early Resident Evil games in that when you first start out you have limited items and you have to explore and survive the horrors which are unleashed upon you. To start with, you have a limited inventory capacity to store the items that you find. Inventory is made up of storage slots and everything from each weapon you find. The ammo and healing items you obtain, as well as the keys and puzzle items, all take up a slot of item space. The amount that you can carry is quite restricted, much like the earlier Resident Evil games, but you can slightly increase your item slots when you find a backpack later on in the game. Ammo in the game is quite scarce. Now you do find ammo dotted about the rooms and the environments, but some of it's purposely hidden, so you might go in a room and you might not see any ammo, but then if you look on the floor you might find some ammo hidden under a crate or a box or hidden inside a destroyable box. And the same goes with other items that you can find in the game as well, and it's set up so that you have to purposely look and really explore each room. Healing items make a return in this game, so in the game as your health deteriorates it's signified by two methods really. So you got the first most obvious one is as you take more damage your screen becomes more bloody, and the worse you get the more bloody and red it becomes. Now you can disable this feature, but also it also has the classic Resident Evil setup in that on your left wrist you've got what looks like a smartwatch with an ECG meter, and when you've got full health it's beating green and it's going up and down nicely. As you get into sort of lower health, it starts going yellow, and then when you're in the danger area, it goes bright red. The famous green herb makes a return to Resident Evil 7. However, using it on its own doesn't really recover much health. Instead, you need to mix it with something called a chemical fluid to form a bottle of first aid solution. And when you use the solution, that restores a larger amount of health. Now, you can find these bottles of solutions ready made and dotted around the environment, but like with the other items and ammo in the game, these can be well hidden at times. Resident Evil 7 has a lot of item crafting, so it's quite a large feature of the game. So as you go around and explore, you will find something called chemical fluid. Now this is a key item as you need it to make not only the first aid solutions, which I talked about briefly, but also for things like ammo. So if you mix it with things like, say, gunpowder, that'll make handgun bullets, or if you find solid fuel tablets, you can combine that with the chemical fluid and that'll make flamethrower ammo. Item management is made a bit easier as the chest from the early Resident Evil games makes a return, and just like those early games, whatever you store in there can be obtained from any of the chests you visit, which are always located with a save point. The combat in the game can be quite challenging when fighting the monsters, which are called Moulded and members of the Baker family. So when you're fighting any of the creatures or family members, you really want to get headshots and not waste precious ammo trying to do body shots, as that doesn't really do much damage at all. A new feature that's been introduced in the combat in this game is the ability to actually reduce the damage you receive from enemies' attacks. So if you time it right, you can block some of their attacks and it does reduce the portion of damage that you receive. But generally a better strategy is just to avoid the blows altogether. And I found that in the game as well, if you do get hit, you do end up on a red health status with as little as 1 or 2 hits from quite a lot of the enemies and from the bosses themselves. Now I did mention briefly that when you're fighting you do want to focus on headshots. Now that's the most effective way to put the enemies down, not only the Baker family but also the monsters which are called Moulded. Now when the Moulded appear, you can kill them much more quickly by destroying the head or the arms, and if you do body shots it doesn't really seem to do anything, and if you do miss or waste a lot of ammo, when it does come to certain points in the game it can make it very punishing to try and actually survive and do what you need to do. There's a constant tension throughout the game as you manage not only limited resources but also contend with members of the Baker family who are not only a terror to fight but will actually stalk you at certain points of the game and do leave you feeling quite underpowered when you face them. There are also points where enemies will suddenly appear and attack you when you least expect it, making journeys down the dark and gloomy corridors all the more terrifying. The whole setting and character design is thoroughly well done. So the setting itself is in the backwaters of Louisiana, and the buildings you explore are all designed very well and appear to be quite run down, and the environment can be not only unpleasant to look at and sticky, but it also gives off a feeling of being unclean, diseased and quite sickly. As you explore the decaying locations, you see not only the buildings that have fallen into disrepair and have seen better days, but you come across what looks like stains of blood and also various stains from what looks like body fluids. You'll find carcasses and bits of unidentified flesh which you're not sure of the origins of, whether it's actually human or some other creature, and you're not sure whether this is simply being put there from a family who's made a successful kill or left over from a meal of theirs, as it's implied in the game that the Baker family do practice cannibalism. The Baker family themselves are quite grotesque and feverish to behold. They're less than human not only because of their filthy and unclean appearance, but they also give off a sense of sickness and disease of not only the flesh but of the mind itself. For example, the character Marguerite has quite greasy, lank hair, grey and sallow skin, rotting teeth and almost demonic, unsettling eyes. Her clothing looks sweat stained and unchanged as if she's worn the same outfit for months, and when you reach a certain point in the game she stalks you and is surrounded by insect swarms which add to her overall unwholesome appearance and manner. So I've praised the actual character models and the environments themselves. The only thing I've seen that's not been quite as good is sometimes the textures can look a little bit pixelated when the camera zooms in or pans at a certain direction. So for example, there's an early puzzle where you have to find 3 metal dog heads to actually unlock a door and escape, and I've noticed at certain points when the camera pans in on the actual lock mechanism it looks a bit jagged and pixelated. There's also times where you're exploring and there's almost a delay a few seconds of either a texture popping up or loading on an item in the background. So it might be, I don't know, just a portrait, or like the chemical fluid, for example. Instead of it being loaded immediately, it's a blurring and it just suddenly pops into view, which can break the immersion of the game. But overall, I've not seen many instances of that occurring. The game uses sound very well to create a sense of unease and tension with the ambient sounds and also with the enemies you face too. So when you're exploring the corridors and rooms, you'll hear the occasional scratch, knock, some sort of unexplicable noise, and it leaves you wondering whether or not there's something lurking in the darkness that's about to pounce on you. And I'm going to come back to the characters again, because the voice acting and dialogue is used to great effect in Resident Evil 7. So if we start with Jack, for example, he's the balding father figure, and he shows up relatively early in the game to stalk you and pursue you at different points. And when he comes after you, you can hear him steadily walking and approaching. And when you run away or you attack him, he mocks you and makes various promises that you won't get away. Then with Marguerite, not only is she visually unsettling, but she's also a vile character with her obscenities and insults which she constantly spits at you as the player, and her shrieking if she spots you. All this combined with the ambient sounds creates a great sense of unease and psychological stress, and complements the visuals and enemy design very well. The game has definitely returned to its survival horror roots, which is a wise decision by Capcom. Some may argue that the switch in perspective to a first-person view is borrowing from games like Amnesia and Outlast, but seeing as how successful those games have been, I say it's definitely a wise decision by Capcom to move the game in this direction. I really enjoy the enemy design in the game, not only the monsters called the Moulders, which are quite challenging and you have to make sure your shots hit successfully and destroy the head, also the Baker family themselves, who are quite visually disturbing and are voiced very well. The Baker family in this game actually remind me of the family from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and also the mutated and inbred family from The Hills Have Eyes. In both those films, years of isolation and depravity has created its own type of horror. The reason I say that is because in both those films and in this game, you automatically compare the family unit to a sort of normal functioning family in society, and in the game and in the two films, these families have gone so far to the extreme as they relish in torture, psychological bullying, and are just so unpleasant that you really are thankful that you're not actually facing them in real life. The combat can be quite desperate in the game, especially when you need to land shots accurately, as you try not only to avoid being hit by whatever's pursuing you, but also accurately hit them where it's going to do the most damage. The more restrictive item capacity is also a welcome step back to the older Resident Evil games, as this forces you to plan and prioritise what you need to bring to make sure you actually survive the horrors you are going to face. There's also multiple endings in Resident Evil 7, which will also encourage multiple playthroughs. As you play through the game, you'll notice there's quite a lot of nods back to the original games in the Resident Evil series. So for example, the first time you use a lockpick, an achievement will pop up called Master of Unlocking, which is a throwback to when Barry Burton makes a remark to Jill Valentine. He gives her a lockpick in the first Resident Evil game. There's also the sense of being pursued at times by Jack and Marguerite, which reminds me of the Tyrant and the Nemesis from the Resident Evil games 2 and 3, in that they provided a constant sense of dread until you found a way to permanently kill them, as each time you encountered them initially, they'd always find a way to revive and pursue you relentlessly. Now to talk about some of the bad points. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the occasional texture issues which, although are infrequent, when they do pop up they can detract from the overall well-polished environment. Also, the biggest thing that's annoying is Ethan's running speed. Now all I can say is that if I faced being chased by a maniac who can regenerate from mortal wounds, I certainly wouldn't be jogging around, I'd be running as fast as I can. Ethan seems to think it's acceptable to just run at a nice steady leisurely pace. The running pace seems to be a little bit faster than your normal walking pace, but I do suspect Capcom limited the ability to run quickly just so that it creates a sense that you're never actually able to really get away from whatever's pursuing you. Now I do understand that the game is designed to be a survival horror, but it does seem a little bit frustrating at times that your character only runs a little bit faster than when you're just walking at a normal pace. One thing that does seem a little bit underwhelming is the actual boss battles themselves. So although the circumstances and the settings in which you fight them are quite impressive, when it gets down to the actual final battles with each boss, it does seem very easy to actually kill them. Whereas when it comes to the actual normal enemies, they do seem to be able to kill me quite easily in as little as maybe 1 or 2 hits. And it just seems that they gang up on you quite easily, the normal enemies, whereas the boss battles do seem a little bit more straightforward and easy to win. So to sum it up, I think Resident Evil 7 is a pretty awesome game. I was quite wary of getting this, especially after the letdown that was Resident Evil 6, but after playing this game, those concerns have definitely been banished. Gameplay on the whole is quite enjoyable. The puzzles and unusual keys have returned, the tension of fighting with limited ammo and resources has come back, and the enemy design and sickly visual does a convincing job of making you feel like you're in a desperate situation. Initially you may think, well, is this actually a Resident Evil game with such a big change in setting and perspective? You'd definitely be forgiven for thinking so, but as you play and discover journal and letter entries which add to the narrative, you will see how easily it's all linked together. Overall, whether or not you're a wary fan of the previous games or a new gamer to the series, you'll quickly become engaged in the gameplay and story, and I strongly feel Capcom have done a great job in getting back to the roots of the survival horror series which made Resident Evil so great to start with. Well everybody, that's it for this episode of First Impressions. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss a new video that comes out. Once again, thanks for watching and I'll catch you guys later.